It was a Monday, a day like any other, when my world began to crack. I had spent years of my life building something. Not just a business, not just a home, but a legacy, a living testament to all the love and sacrifice I had poured into my family. The thought that it could all come crashing down so easily, so quickly, was almost too much to bear. But that morning, it was the unmistakable pressure in my chest that told me something was wrong. I didn't think it was anything serious at first. Just a little tightness. Maybe it was just stress, maybe the exhaustion from trying to keep up with a body that didn't obey me the way it used to. I always thought I was indestructible, and for the longest time I had convinced myself I was. But as the room swirled around me, as my breath became shallow and my knees buckled, I realized that I was powerless in the face of something I had no control over. My children weren't there, of course. Where were they when their mother, who had given them everything, needed them? They were busy, always busy. Lawrence had a deal to close, and Victoria, well, she had her social obligations. They didn't have time for me, not when I was alive, not when I was strong. Certainly not now. I don't remember much after that. Just the sterile white of the hospital and the feeling of 1,000 needles threading into my veins. When I finally opened my eyes, it was to the blinding glare of a fluorescent light above me and the scent of antiseptic in the air. I was in the ICU. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. I was a prisoner, trapped in a shell of my own making. A woman who had once commanded a room now rendered silent, powerless. And for 7 days, I lay there in the silence. The beep of the machines the only sound in the room. Nurses came and went, their faces a blend of pity and professionalism. They spoke to me, but I couldn't respond. Not that it mattered. They didn't speak to me with any real concern. No, my children didn't come, not in those first 7 days. Then on the 8th day I heard their voices. They entered the room like actors on a stage, their faces masked in a grim expression of concern, but I knew the truth. They didn't come because they cared.
Well,
they came because they were already planning, already calculating what they stood to inherit. "Oh, Mommy," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling, though I could hear the faintest edge of relief behind the theatrics. "You look so fragile." Lawrence didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned me like a man appraising an asset. They thought I couldn't hear them, that I was unconscious, and for a moment I allowed them to believe it. Then they started. "Did you talk to the doctor?" Victoria's voice was low, urgent. Lawrence's tone was all business, detached. "He said it's serious, but they're not sure. We need to prepare for the worst." Prepare for the worst. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap out of that bed and show them that I was still here, still in control. But I couldn't. All I could do was listen. The conversation turned, as I had known it would, to my estate. "My development deal for the Midtown Tower is closing in 6 months, Lawrence said. His voice laced with frustration. "I was counting on using her estate as collateral. Do you have any idea where her documents are? The will, the trust agreements, the insurance policies. They were vultures, circling above me, already dividing my life between them. And they hadn't even bothered to ask how I was, or whether I would pull through. They had already decided I was a lost cause." "I don't know," Victoria said, her voice shaky now. "She's always been so secretive about everything. The safe in the library." "Exactly," Lawrence interrupted. "Private and disorganized. This is a logistical nightmare. We need to get our hands on those documents. What if she doesn't wake up? If she's in a coma, it could take months to get everything sorted." I felt like I had been struck. My son, my daughter, they were discussing my death like it was just another business transaction. There was no love in their voices, no tenderness, no grief. Only greed, cold and unforgiving. I had given them everything. The money, the time, the support. They had been my world, my reason for everything I did. But now I saw them for what they truly were. They didn't care about me. They cared about my wealth, my legacy, the empire I had built. To them, I was nothing more than an asset to liquidate. The world I had crafted for them, the years of hard work, the sacrifices, were nothing more than a commodity to be sold. I could feel the sharp sting of betrayal like a blade cutting through the layers of my skin. I wanted to scream, to wake up from this nightmare. But I didn't. I stayed silent. I stayed still. And in my silence, I began to plan. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I wasn't going to die. Not yet. And when I did, it wouldn't be their hands that would claim my legacy. I would make sure of that. They would not get a single penny. They would inherit nothing but the bitter, unyielding truth of what it means to betray the one who gave them everything. And so, as I lay there, unable to speak, I began to design my revenge. Not in the way they expected. Not in a loud, violent outburst, but in silence. In the quiet corners of my mind, where I would rebuild my legacy, stronger than before. They thought I was done. But they hadn't seen me yet. I woke to the quiet hum of machines, the sterile taste of hospital air that clung to my tongue like the scent of cheap disinfectant. It was not the first time I had woken in a hospital room, but this time it felt different. I was different. My body, frail and fragile, seemed a distant thing, but my mind, oh, my mind was still as sharp as it had ever been. It was the one thing I could rely on, the one thing that no illness, no betrayal could take from me. The pain in my chest was a dull throb, reminding me of the battle I had just fought and survived. But it was nothing compared to the searing ache I felt inside, a deep, gnawing emptiness. For days I had been unconscious, trapped in the void of a coma. And in that time I had heard things I couldn't unhear. It started as a low murmur, the sound of voices, hushed but urgent. My children, Lawrence and Emily. They thought I couldn't hear them, thought my mind was as trapped as my body. They were wrong. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could hear every word. Do you know where the will is? Lawrence's voice, cold and calculating. The will, the trust, the insurance policies. We need to figure this out now. She's not going to make it. That was when I understood. It wasn't my health that mattered to them. It was never about me. They saw me as a liability, a burden. And worse, they saw me as a resource ripe for the taking. They were already planning to pick through the remnants of my life, dividing up the spoils before I had even taken my last breath. I heard Emily's voice, distant but clear in my memory. If she doesn't wake up, it'll be months before we can even touch anything. We need to know where everything is. Lawrence is right, this is a mess. Mess. My life, my legacy, reduced to a mess. And in that moment, the clarity that came to me was not of despair, but of cold, fierce resolve. I may have been trapped in my body, but my mind was still mine. They had written me off, assumed I was already gone. But they were wrong. I wasn't dead yet. And I wasn't going to let them destroy what I had built, what I had fought for, just because they were too short-sighted to see the value of anything beyond their own greed. My children had always seen me as a resource, a means to an end. When Lawrence asked me for the money to fund his latest business venture, I gave it to him. When Emily needed help financing her political ambitions, I helped. I had always been there, ready to give, but no longer. They had shown me exactly who they were when they thought I wasn't listening, and I would not be their fool anymore. As the days passed, I began to feel strength returning to my body. It was slow, agonizingly slow, but with each breath, with each faint flicker of feeling in my limbs, I began to rebuild. I had spent my life restoring the broken, the forgotten, and the neglected, and now I would do the same for myself. I would rebuild my legacy, and I would protect it. I had worked my entire life to create something beautiful, something lasting. My home, my art collection, the business I had built from the ground up, these were the things that defined me. Not my children's expectations. Not their greed. I had poured my heart into them, given them everything, but they had never learned the lesson I thought I was teaching them. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about the things you could sell or liquidate. It was about what you left behind. The mark you made on the world. And now, my children had made it clear that they weren't interested in my mark. They only cared about what they could take. So I would make sure they couldn't take anything. Started with a plan. A plan to protect everything I had built, everything I had worked for. I couldn't let them tear it down for their own gain. And I knew exactly who to call. Franklin. He had been with me through thick and thin, always by my side. When Robert died, he was there, helping me navigate the legal mess that followed. He understood me. He knew my values, my vision, my life's work. And now, he was going to help me secure my legacy from the hands of those who would destroy it. I called him, my voice hoarse but determined. I told him everything. The betrayal, the plans I had overheard, the emptiness I felt in my heart. And he listened. His silence on the other end of the line thick with the anger he felt on my behalf. "We're going to fix this, Grace," he said, his voice firm, reassuring. "I'm going to make sure that your legacy is protected, no matter what." And then I called Alana, my financial consultant. Alana was brilliant, a woman who could take the chaos of my financial portfolio and turn it into something solid, something secure. We had worked together for years, building my assets, managing my investments. Now we would build something new. Something that could never be touched. Together we would create a foundation. Not just a simple trust but a real legal fortress. A foundation that would protect everything. My house, my art, my financial assets, from anyone who thought they could take them. It would be mine and it would be untouchable. The plan was set in motion. Franklin and Alana worked tirelessly, drafting the documents, creating the legal framework that would ensure my legacy was safe. And as I watched them work, I realized that this was my moment. I had spent my life giving to others, sacrificing for them. But now it was time for me to fight for what was mine. My legacy, my work, my story. I was no longer the woman lying helpless in a hospital bed. I was the architect of my future, and I would build it brick by brick, no matter how long it took. I would ensure that my children would never be able to take what I had spent my life creating. The days following my awakening were a blur of physical pain and mental clarity. Every breath, every movement was a reminder of how close I had come to slipping away. But I wasn't done yet. I could feel my strength returning, slowly but steadily, like a quiet tide creeping back into the shore after a storm. I wasn't the frail, feeble woman my children thought they could manipulate. No, I was something else now, something stronger, something more determined. I began to sit up more often, each time for a few moments longer. The pain was unbearable at times, but it served as a reminder that I was still here and still in control. I could feel the pull of my mind, sharper than ever, forming strategies, planning my next steps. I didn't need my children to be the ones to decide my future. I had spent my life building something beautiful, something lasting. I wasn't going to let them take it. Not now. Not ever. I called Franklin, my trusted lawyer, who had been my confidant for years. The sound of his voice, calm and familiar, was a comfort in the midst of this chaos. "Grace, I'm glad to hear you're recovering," he said, his voice full of concern. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to make some changes," I said, my voice steady, yet filled with a sense of purpose. "I want to protect my legacy, the house, the art, everything I've built. I'm not changing the will. I'm doing something stronger." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear him nodding, understanding. "You're thinking of a foundation." "Exactly," I said, relieved that he immediately understood. "I don't want my children to get their hands on anything. Not one thing. I need a structure, something that will make sure my legacy is protected for future generations. A foundation that is legally untouchable." "I'll start drafting the documents," he replied without hesitation. "We'll make sure everything is bulletproof." Franklin's confidence gave me the strength I needed. It was time to take control, and this would be the first step. But I needed another piece to make this plan work, Alana. She was the one who could make sure my financial structure was solid, that everything I owned was transferred properly and securely. I called her the next day. "Grace." Alana's voice was warm and efficient as always. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I replied. "But I need your help with something important. I want to create a foundation, a place where my assets, my art, my home, my investments can be secured. I don't want anything tied to me personally anymore." Alana's tone immediately shifted. She had known me long enough to understand that when I asked for something, I meant business. "Of course," she said. "I've been preparing for this. We'll set it up so that everything is irrevocable and protected. I'll help you transfer all your assets into the foundation." Over the next few days, Alana and Franklin worked tirelessly, each of them doing what they did best. Franklin, with his legal expertise, carefully crafted the documents for the foundation, while Alana meticulously reviewed all my financial accounts, ensuring that everything was transferred smoothly into the new structure. Played my part too. I had never been one to sit idly by. I reviewed every document, every transfer, every step of the process. There was no room for error, no room for my children to slip through the cracks. But through it all, I had to deal with my children's visits, which continued to come as regularly as the nurses. They still hadn't figured out what I was doing. They thought I was weak. They thought I was fading. But I saw them for what they were: opportunistic vultures, circling above my weakened body. They came, of course, pretending to care, pretending to worry about my health. They would bring flowers, ask how I was feeling. But I saw the truth behind their polite smiles, the way they glanced around my room, as if searching for clues about where the treasure was hidden. Lawrence would sit at the edge of my bed, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest, while Victoria, with her perfectly made-up face, would stand by the window, gazing out as though she had somewhere else to be. They asked the usual questions. "How are you feeling, Mom? Is there anything we can do for you?" And every time I answered them with nothing more than the bare minimum, feigning weakness, pretending to be the frail woman they thought they could control. I knew they were searching for my will, for the key to unlocking my life's work. They wouldn't find it. The more they visited, the more I saw through their facade. They weren't here to comfort me. They were here to assess, to strategize, to make sure they could get what they wanted when the time came. And they had no idea that the time for their manipulation had passed. I had already made my decision. They wouldn't get a single penny. As the foundation took shape, I began to feel the weight of my decisions settle around me like a cloak. Every asset I owned, my home, my collection of art, the business, now belonged to something greater than me. It belonged to a cause. It belonged to a future. And my children, they had nothing to say about it. I was creating something indestructible. By the time they visited again, the first round of legal documents was signed. My assets, my home, my legacy were already in the hands of the foundation. They arrived at my house like they always did, with their pretentious smiles, their questions veiled with concern. But I was different now. I wasn't the woman they could bully into submission. I wasn't weak. I wasn't vulnerable. I wasn't going to let them have anything. I was in control. And soon they would see that. It was time. The house, once full of warmth, memories, and laughter, had become an impersonal structure, a monument to everything I had built and fought for. Now, it was the stage for something that would be even more significant than any of my past achievements. I had carefully orchestrated everything. Every legal document, every financial transaction, every step I had taken in the last few months had led to this moment. And I would not allow my children to steal what I had worked so tirelessly to create. I sat in my favorite chair in the library, a chair that used to feel like home. The worn leather seemed to embrace me as I sat there, preparing myself for the confrontation that was coming. This room, with its bookshelves lined with the works I had painstakingly collected over the years, now represented the very heart of my decision. It was no longer my sanctuary, but the stronghold that would protect my legacy from the people who had once been the center of my life. The doorbell rang. My heart, though calm, gave a small lurch. I was ready. I stood, taking a steadying breath, before I made my way to the foyer to greet them. Lawrence and Emily stood at the front door, their faces unreadable, though I could see the nervous energy in the way they fidgeted with their hands. They had no idea what was coming. "Mother," Lawrence greeted, his voice cold, his eyes flicking around the room with practiced disinterest. Emily gave me a quick, almost too perfect smile, her eyes scanning the space as if it were all hers already. "Come in," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "Please have a seat." They entered, and I could feel the tension between us. They thought this would be a conversation about the division of my assets, about what they could claim as their own. But what they didn't know was that I had already made my decision. My legacy was no longer in their hands. They settled into the chairs opposite me, and I could see it in their eyes. The expectation, the entitlement. They had been so sure that I was weak, that I was fading. But they were wrong. "Mother, I know this must be hard for you," Emily began, her voice syrupy sweet, a little too rehearsed. "But you must understand, Lawrence and I. We've been planning for the future. We've always been there for you, haven't we? We just need to ensure that everything is in order so we can continue the work you've started. For the family, of course." She looked to Lawrence for support, and he gave a slight nod. His expression all business. "Yes, Mother," he added. "We know how much you've built, and we respect that. But you've worked so hard, and now it's time for us to finish what you started." Finish what I started. The word stung, but I didn't flinch. I had heard these phrases before. They were manipulations wrapped in kindness, attempts to pull me into their plans for my money. But I wasn't falling for it this time. "I see," I said, my tone cool. "But that's not what we're going to discuss today." They both froze, and I felt a small, private thrill of satisfaction. They weren't expecting this. They thought they were coming to settle a matter of inheritance. What they didn't know was that I had already rewritten the rules of the game. "I've made some changes," I continued, meeting their gaze steadily. "Everything I have worked for, everything I've built, is no longer yours to claim." Their faces contorted in confusion, but I continued, letting the weight of my words sink in. "My house, my art collection, my finances, none of it belongs to you now. It belongs to the Monroe Foundation for Historic Preservation and Design." I watched as the realization began to dawn on them, and it was almost too much to bear. For the first time in their lives, they were faced with the truth. I was no longer their easy target. They had lost everything. "What do you mean?" Lawrence asked, his voice thick with disbelief, his face turning red. "You can't just give it all away. That's not your decision to make." I didn't flinch. "It is my decision, Lawrence. And it's done. The foundation is now the legal owner of everything. The house, the art, the investments, all of it is now a part of something greater. It will be used to preserve cultural heritage, to support young students of design, and to protect the legacy I've worked my entire life to create. And you have no access to it." For a moment, neither of them said a word. Emily's face flushed with anger, and Lawrence's jaw clenched. They had underestimated me, thought they could push me around, thought they could twist my arm and make me bend to their will. But they were wrong. "This is ridiculous," Emily finally shouted, her voice shrill. "You're out of your mind, Mother. You're destroying everything we've worked for." "Destroying?" I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "No, Emily. I'm preserving it. You and Lawrence have shown me exactly who you are and what you want. You want my wealth, my assets, for your own gain. But you never once showed me the love, the respect, or the appreciation I deserve. You never saw what I built. You only saw what you could take." I could see her faltering, the foundation of her entitled world crumbling in real time. "You've never understood," I continued, "that a legacy isn't something you can just take and sell. It's something that should endure. My work, my passion, the art I've collected, it's not for sale. It's not yours for the taking." Lawrence tried once more, his voice low but furious. "You can't do this. We're your children. We have every right to." "No," I interrupted him firmly. "You have no right to anything. You never earned it. This was never about you. This was about me. And now I am giving it to the future. To something that will last. Something that won't be torn apart by greed." The silence in the room was deafening. The two people I had once loved more than anything in the world were staring at me as if I had just erased them from my life. And in a way I had. They left soon after, their faces twisted in a mix of disbelief and fury. But I felt nothing. As I watched them walk out the door, I knew it was over. The ties were severed. I had made my decision and there was no turning back. The silence of the house felt different now. It wasn't the quiet of peace or comfort, but something far deeper. It was the kind of silence you find when you realize that something has ended. The space where my children's laughter had once filled the air now felt hollow. Where they used to stand in the foyer, looking for approval or maybe for something they could take, they no longer came. I hadn't expected them to return after our last conversation. I hadn't expected any apologies, any regret. But still, when the days stretched into weeks without so much as a phone call or a message, I felt it. The absence of their presence. Their complete disregard for the years I had spent nurturing them, giving them everything they needed, only to have them tear it all away. It was a pain I couldn't describe, a deep ache in my chest that reminded me of what I had lost. But in the midst of that pain, something changed. I had been consumed by the idea of what I had lost for so long. My children, my legacy, my family. It was all slipping away from me. But as the weeks passed, as the silence in my home grew louder, I began to realize something. This was no longer about them. This was no longer about proving anything to anyone, least of all to my children who saw me as a resource rather than a mother. This was about me. This was about my life, my legacy, and the future I was going to build. I started to focus on what had always brought me joy, the work I had spent my life building, the things I had poured my heart into. The foundation wasn't just a safety net. It was a new beginning, a chance to invest in something greater than myself, something that could help preserve history, culture, and design for future generations. I had spent so many years helping others, building businesses, and caring for my family that I had forgotten what it meant to care for myself. The pain from my children's betrayal was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. I began to shift my focus, turning my energy into the work I was now so deeply passionate about. I spent my days working with my new team at the Monroe Foundation, young and ambitious designers, historians, and curators who were eager to learn from me. It was strange at first, working with people who didn't have my blood running through their veins, but the warmth I received from them felt more real than any of the fake affection my children had shown me in the past. They were driven by a shared vision, to preserve the cultural heritage I had always valued, to protect the stories and the art that spoke to my soul. They weren't looking for money or prestige. They were looking to leave something beautiful behind, something lasting, something real. And, in a way, they became my new family. The family I had always hoped my children would be. Through them, I found a renewed sense of purpose. We worked on new initiatives to restore historic buildings, to support young designers, and to fund scholarships for those who shared the same passion for art and preservation that I had always held. I poured my heart into these projects, and as I did, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: peace. A deep, unwavering peace. I had finally let go of my children. And while it was hard at first, it was also liberating. I realized that my true legacy wasn't going to be a collection of things. Houses, art, money. My legacy was going to be the work that would live on long after I was gone. It would be the young minds I had nurtured, the buildings I had saved, the culture I had helped preserve. The first event I hosted for the foundation was a small gathering, but it felt like a triumph. The guests were from all over. University professors, young designers, artists who shared the same vision. The energy in the room was different from anything I had experienced before. It was vibrant, full of possibility. We discussed new projects, new ideas, and the future of cultural preservation. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a matriarch in a different sense, a leader, a mentor, a creator. And as I stood in the middle of that room, surrounded by people who respected me for my knowledge, my passion, and my commitment, I realized something else. I had finally found my family. They were not the ones I had given life to, but the ones who shared in my mission. The ones who understood the value of what I was creating. I no longer needed the validation of my children. They had made their choice, and now it was my turn to make mine. My life's work was now protected, not just from their greed, but from the fear that had always held me back. The fear of being alone, of being abandoned. The truth was, I had never been alone. I had always had my work, my legacy, And now I had a new family to support me. The pain of their betrayal didn't disappear overnight, but it no longer defined me. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece, and now I was living it on my own terms. I sat at my desk one evening, looking out at the garden, the golden light of dusk pouring through the windows. The house, once a symbol of my broken dreams, now stood as a testament to what I had achieved. It was no longer just a building. It was a cornerstone of something greater, a foundation that would carry my values forward, long into the future. And in that moment, I understood that my legacy wasn't in the hands of those who had betrayed me. It was in the work I had done, in the people I had inspired, and in the world I was continuing to build. I smiled to myself, a quiet, contented smile. For the first time in a long while I felt whole again. It's strange how, when we finally let go of something, we realize just how much weight it had been carrying. For so long my life had been dominated by the need to provide, to give, to ensure that my children had everything they could possibly want or need. I thought that if I could just make their lives perfect, I could finally feel at peace. But instead, I had created a different kind of chain, one that bound me to their expectations, their demands, their endless wants. But now, as I stood at the helm of the Monroe Foundation, I realized that the weight I had been carrying wasn't mine to bear anymore. I had set my legacy free. It had been months since I had severed my ties with Lawrence and Emily, and in that time, I had found something I hadn't realized I was searching for: peace. The silence that had once felt like a gaping hole was now filled with purpose, with work that I believed in, with people who valued me for the contributions I had made, not for the money I could provide. The foundation was flourishing. Our first projects were already underway. Historic buildings were being saved, young designers were being mentored, and my art collection was being cared for in ways I could never have imagined. Everything I had fought for was now part of something larger, something that would endure long after I was gone. My vision had expanded beyond the four walls of my home and into a world that truly appreciated the beauty and value of history and culture. I sat in my office one afternoon, reviewing the progress reports from our latest initiative. The project to restore a series of buildings in the heart of the city was on track, and the young architects we had supported were already planning their next steps. I felt a thrill run through me. This was what mattered. This was my legacy, not in buildings or art, but in the people I had inspired and the preservation of the things that truly mattered. As I read through the reports, my assistant knocked softly on the door. "Grace, they're here," she said, a smile in her voice. It was time. The first large meeting of the Monroe Foundation's board was about to begin. I had invited members from all across the country, respected museum curators, professors, young architects, and the team of designers and students we had been supporting. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the moment when everything I had worked for would be brought to life. I stood up from my desk, smoothing my dress and checking my reflection in the mirror. I wasn't a frail old woman anymore. I was strong and I had a purpose. When I entered the meeting room, I felt a surge of pride. Around the long table sat my colleagues, my new family. They were all here because they believed in the same things I did: the preservation of history, the importance of culture, and the need to pass that knowledge on to future generations. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I saw their eager faces looking at me for direction, for leadership. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady and strong. "Today we are taking the first step in something monumental. This is not just about saving buildings or collecting art. This is about saving stories, preserving the threads that bind us to our past, and ensuring that future generations understand the importance of history in shaping who we are." There was a moment of silence as everyone absorbed my words. Then, one by one, the discussions began. We reviewed the plans for upcoming projects, discussed potential funding sources, and brainstormed new initiatives. The excitement in the room was palpable. Felt like we were all building something together, something bigger than ourselves. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined our first major project for the foundation, a preservation initiative that would help restore a series of historic buildings, as well as a scholarship program to support young designers from underserved communities. It was exactly the kind of work I had always hoped to do, and now, with the foundation in place, it was possible. As the meeting wrapped up, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been long and at times painful, but it had been worth it. My legacy was no longer about my children or what they could take from me. It was about the work I was doing, the people I was helping, and the future I was creating. As the last of the board members left, I lingered in the room for a few moments longer, taking in the feeling of satisfaction that washed over me. I was no longer at the mercy of anyone's expectations. I had created something that couldn't be taken away. I had found freedom. I walked down the hallway of the Foundation's offices, feeling the weight of the past slip off my shoulders with every step. The house I had once feared would be sold, torn apart, and lost, was now a symbol of something much greater. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was the headquarters of a foundation dedicated to preserving the past for future generations. In the garden, the flowers I had planted years ago were blooming, their colors vibrant in the late afternoon sun. I stood for a moment, just taking it all in. The world was still turning. Life was still unfolding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My children were no longer a part of my life, and that didn't hurt anymore. They had made their choices. They had turned their backs on me when I needed them most. But I didn't need them anymore. I had a new family now, and together we were building something that would endure. I wasn't just leaving behind a legacy. I was creating a future. And in that future, there was no room for betrayal or greed. There was only room for history, culture, and the kind of love that transcends money. And that, I knew, was the greatest gift I could ever give.